Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Julio Peterson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julio Peterson. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate for the Shubert Organization. MAS was founded 5 years before the Boroughs united to form the consolidated city of New York. 120 years later, our 5 boroughs are still each a mini city unto themselves, with different priorities, economies, pressures, and opportunities. In this session, our resident borough experts will talk about the development trends in their neighborhoods and how waterfront housing density topics affect each of our 5 cities within the cities. Please welcome the Honorable Ruben Diaz, the Bronx Borough President. He's been doing an amazing job in attracting new businesses and revitalizing the borough. I would also like to personally welcome Gale Brewer. I'm proud to say that I've known Gale since I was a kid. She was instrumental. She was instrumental in helping save low-income housing on the Upper West Side where I grew up. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Matt Chaban, Metro Reporter and Columnist for the New York Times. Thank you for joining us today.
So I think you guys have the good fortune of being perhaps some of the more notable speakers today. So rather than telling the people who you are, we've decided that by way of introduction, you'll each take about 90 seconds to tell us the one most exciting thing going on in your borough at the moment and the one most challenging thing in terms of urbanism, planning, water, the whole range of issues. And just starting on being gentlemanly, starting with Gale here.
Yes.
Well, there's so many challenges. Number one, we want to save our mom and pop stores. And in the city council, I passed legislation that would limit the streetscape for banks to 25 feet and larger stores, except for grocery stores, which we love, to 40 feet. So we want to do that throughout Manhattan. It's not always a 5-borough challenge, but as all know, I have had it with too many chain stores in a neighborhood. So trying to save mom and pops is a priority, and we're going to come up with some ideas. What is good about being in the borough president's office is having the opportunity to look in advance for planning for a neighborhood. We could work with the community boards, but now we have a South Street Seaport Task Force. We're going to work on the Penn Station. We're working in Lenox Terrace and East Harlem, and we're working with the neighborhoods and the businesses and the developers and the city to plan before the City Planning Commission comes knocking and says, we're certifying, and you have 60 days or whatever the amount is. So we're trying early planning for all aspects of Manhattan, but at the same time, we want to make sure we save our mom and pops.
So first, let me just thank Vin and Jeannie and all of you for being here today and having us here. I think that when you look at the Bronx, everything about the Bronx is good. It's what I call the new Bronx. One of the things that everyone, I only have 90 seconds now. One of the things that I like to tell folks is that over the last 5 years alone, you should know that in the Bronx, we've seen private equity investments of up to $6 billion plus. People don't know that. We've created 14,000 new jobs. We've seen over $700 million in housing, all of it built in a sustainable way. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. We've seen over $300 million in investment in our public parks. Last year was the safest year that the Bronx has seen since 1963. And with some of these specific things that we have been able to champion is, for instance, we're going to have the largest ice sports complex in the country with the Kingsbridge National Ice Center. We have just seen the MTA vote on in their 5-year capital plan for 4 Metro North stations in the eastern corridor of our borough. I have rezoned and upzoned so many different avenues, and I'll speak about that a little later on, but I want to say that the most challenging part is that many of you here don't know all of that, and that in America and throughout the world, we're still being stereotyped The stigmatization is still there. That when someone says, I'm going to the Bronx, oh, be careful, you're going to get killed. Oh, be careful, you're going to get mugged. When people come to the Bronx and they're here visiting the city, believe it or not, we still have a lot of individuals who want to see the rubble, who want to see the decay of the 70s and the 80s, and then when they don't see that, they get disappointed. So go to ilovethebronx.com and see that we are experiencing a new Bronx.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Both of you. Now, perhaps staying with the Bronx, there's been a huge amount of talk, both during the campaign and the current administration, with housing. There's a lot of concern about affordable housing. Half expected that to come up as one of the challenges, and I'm sure it's certainly up there. If you could briefly speak a little bit about the mayor's housing plan and the interactions you've had with them and sort of the issues you see, needing to tackle, what works for the borough, what doesn't, what kind of things you'll be promoting, and then same question to you guys.
So I think one size does not fit all. And you're going to hear Gale say something a little different than what I'm going to say. As you all know, if you don't know, the mayor's plan calls for 200,000 units of affordable housing over the next 10 years or so. 60% of those units will be rehab, and 40% will be new housing. Now, of course, in the Bronx, we have been working with the administration, and we've been working for years to rehab a lot of those buildings that, unfortunately, were in disrepair or have been in disrepair for so many years. We've also been doing a lot of new housing. When we approached the administration, we said we would love to help with this goal, but we want you to understand that we don't want all of the lower income, 60% AMI, dumped on the Bronx. Gale may feel a little bit differently about that. Now, it doesn't mean that I do not support affordable housing or low-income housing. We do that every single day in my borough. I put my money where my mouth is with regards to Reso 8 money. But the reality is that we still have professionals that we want to retain. We want to keep those individuals who study, they get a career, they make it, and they're leaving us. And the one way to do that is to make sure that as we speak of affordable housing, that it's also affordable to the middle class. Where unfortunately many of those professionals make too much money for 60% AMI or less, and don't make enough money to buy single-family homes in Riverdale or in Country Club or Throsneck. And by the way, the Bronx does have single-family homes, believe it or not. So as we rezone and as we upzone certain corridors, we want to see higher AMIs, and we were pleased to see that the mayor incorporated up to as high as 165% AMI when we're speaking of these new developments.
Well, the affordable housing crisis is very real in Manhattan. I think we know that. And when we talk about planning, it includes the challenge of building affordable housing. And in Manhattan, we have very little land, and what exists is expensive. So we absolutely have to preserve what we have. And as you might know, the rent regulation laws are expiring next year in Albany. We absolutely have to not only continue them, but get rid of, in my opinion, things like vacancy decontrol and preferential rent, and some of the ways that the rent stabilization gets eroded. So preservation is important. The few Mitchell-Lamas that we have left, which was the best housing program ever conceived, middle-income housing, and unfortunately many of them have bought out their mortgages. Even those that are middle-income co-op, an incredibly important part of middle income. In some cases, I know Southbridge in Manhattan, by 10 votes the other night, decided to go private, meaning that they're not going to remain in the Mitchell-Lama program as a Mitchell-Lama co-op. So we absolutely have to preserve what we have, and that's a whole discussion, because in the Bloomberg administration, 165 units of new housing, you should know, or housing preserved or new, I can tell you we lost 100,000 units of rent-regulated housing in Manhattan alone in the last 10 years. So we absolutely have to preserve. In terms of new housing in the borough of Manhattan, we have to make sure that it fits the AMI of that neighborhood, so it depends on the neighborhood. I just met with all the Harlem legislators and 32BJ, and we're going to try to figure out what the AMI would be, working with some of the churches that might need funding, and then they preserve the church and build housing over it. Or if we're going to build on land that NYCHA has, for God's sake, work with the residents, work with the local community, and come up with a program that makes sense for that development at that location. Not top down, but bottom up. We also have the upzoning issue. The mayor wants 15 neighborhoods to be upzoned. East Harlem is, I'm sure, one of them. So the question is, with the soft sites that are there, this 80-20 program is for butkas. We don't want 80-20. We want a program that has much more affordable, that fits the AMI for that neighborhood. So I think the way I'm trying to approach it, which is this early planning, it means that we're going to be having a lot of meetings that Thursday at 5 o'clock with a lot of people, but I think that's the only way to say we have to be sure that this is a neighborhood that gets planned for in a little bit of land that we have in the borough of Manhattan. Housing is the #1 challenge for the borough of Manhattan, something that's affordable and something that's not building to the sky, the moon, and the sun, and something that fits into the contextual situation for that neighborhood. So it's a tall order, but I don't think it's impossible if you sit down and try to work with people, working with the nonprofit, working with the unions, working with the for-profit, and figuring out a way that people are not all getting what they want, but the developers have to compromise, the unions have to compromise, the neighborhood has to compromise. We're not going to have anybody in Manhattan. We're not going to have artists. We're not going to have middle-income families. We're not going to have families at all. Also, the single-room occupancy is not standing room only. It stands for single-room occupancy. And we have tons of empty rooms as we sit here today in the SROs in the borough of Manhattan. The owners have the opportunity to work with us, I hope, and with the city needs to give some, because the rooms under a rent-regulated situation would not go for a lot, because that's what their rent is. But rather than put in people who are homeless or people who are students, we need to bring people who are formerly homeless into these who are working. A high percentage of people who are homeless are working. They just can't afford the kinds of rents. So helping the city get people who are homeless back on their feet, one way to do it is through the single-room occupancies, and another way to do it, of course, is to preserve housing that exists. We cannot afford to have one more homeless family. I read today that the number of students has gone up 63% in terms of homeless in the schools, just to give an example of the challenges that we face.
And then we hear things about Airbnb sucking up more.
I'd be glad to talk about Airbnb.
Well, maybe it's better. Just briefly, curious, is there any particular feelings about that in the Bronx, given that, the talk of tourism, rubble, I mean, is it something
No,
you guys
in the Bronx, we've always had our challenges when it comes to hotels, and I'm proud to say that over the last couple of years, we have the Marriott as the first flagship hotel that is being built as we speak. The Hutch Metro Center is going to be a 125-bed residence inn. And we have a boutique hotel at the Hub on 149th Street. It was the old Bronx Opera Theater. And it's doing extremely well. And so we're tied for too many years. We've seen these hot sheet motels being put up in our borough. And Airbnb, that's happening in other boroughs. We want real hotels in mine.
We agree. We want real hotels. We want things like the hostel, the American Hostel on 103rd Street that has low-cost, quality housing and hotels that are catered to those who are younger, who might not have the funding for an expensive hotel. So we need hotels that are legitimate. I want to give the Attorney General credit because he found out that 3/4 of the Airbnb rentals are illegal under the law, and that is not something that's going to preserve the affordable housing that we're all talking about.
And Borough President Diaz, can't really talk about housing without talking about the dreaded G word. Now, I know that you have actually, I was at least one breakfast where you spoke somewhat favorably on the question of gentrification, and so I'm curious, all the different boroughs are different places, and, wondering what you can do to protect against it, but also perhaps to encourage, to harness it? I mean, how does that work?
Well, I think that what happens is the way that the word has been defined in the city of New York and the context of the entire conversation and the revitalization of neighborhoods. We in the Bronx, we don't subscribe to the notion that gentrification has to be that you force out a community and bring in a different community to our borough. What we believe in the Bronx is that we should be working to increase the value of communities, the value of property, and have it so that those individuals within the confines of our borough who are doing well stay there. And the way that you do that is that you upzone. For instance, we've upzoned the waterfront between 149th Street and 138th Street. We've upzoned the southern part of Grand Concourse. We've rezoned and upzoned Webster Avenue between Fordham and Woodlawn Cemetery. We've upzoned White Plains between Gun Hill and 242nd Street. And in none of these areas here, and by the way, River Avenue, which is underneath the L or across from Yankee Stadium, we plan to go up in all of these corridors. And none of them right now have residential buildings that are going to be torn down or taken from somebody under the guise of eminent domain where people get forced out and thrown out of their homes. In the waterfront right now, no one lives there. This is all brownfield. The same thing with the southern part of the Grand Concourse. And so what we want to do is we want to build up. We do it with some mixed income so that we can have affordable, a mixture of affordable housing, and at the same time have some market rates. We do it with amenities. We have the largest indoor mall in the city of New York right now. We just opened it up in August, and people like that. People in the Bronx, believe it or not, they don't want to go to Queens Mall. They don't want to come into Manhattan for their Barnes & Nobles. By the way, we saved Barnes & Nobles, the only bookstore that we have. We saved that yesterday. They want to shop in the Bronx, and they want to go to restaurants. And for those of you who are Epicureans, come to our restaurants. We're more than just Arthur Avenue or City Island. Again, go to ilovethebronx.com. And that's what people want. People see what's happening in other boroughs, and they see what's happening with the waterfront and Esplanades and the revitalization there. And that's what we're doing in my borough. We're going to build strong. We're building smart. We are doing what I call planning with purpose. We're building green, and you know what? We're going to retain those professionals in our borough. And if there should be the case that someone from Manhattan or Brooklyn wants to come and now live in the Bronx, so be it. That's what it's been all about. We've always been the borough that welcomes other individuals.
But briefly, you talk about all the rezonings on the water and things. That was the same argument made for places like Williamsburg or Queens, where regardless, around Williamsburg, I think prices went up 150% since the rezoning, and even the areas where most of the building was industrial sites and things. So are there?
So that's controls? The beauty of being last. Right? The beauty of being last in development is that we get to learn both the positive and the negative of what's happening throughout the city of New York.
Just make sure you don't do 2 doors. That's a big problem.
Exactly. It happened there first, right? So we learned from it. They said the same thing when we did the new Yankee Stadium about the surrounding properties. Those properties are rent stabilized. No one was forced out. Practically all of the individuals that lived on Grand Concourse or on Ogden Avenue, in High Bridge, they all still live there. No one was priced out or forced out. When we speak of, for instance, job creation, what we do is that we work with the Bronx Over Economic Development Corporation. It's one thing to create a job in the Bronx. It's another thing completely to create jobs for Bronxites. That's the reason why when I first started as borough president, our unemployment rate was 13.8%. We just got new numbers. We're down 8.5%. It's not to say that life is perfect, but we're headed in the right direction. And so we're making sure that developers, do business with the Bronx, with vendors, that they hire Bronx folks to install green material, to do the construction work, that we get Bronxites to have a first look at these apartments, that we make sure that people are hired, and at the same time, again, wherever we are looking to do new developments is a completely new area where we know that the surrounding folks are not going to be priced out.
Well, gentrification in Manhattan is a huge issue, and one of the ways that we're trying to deal with it is this inclusionary zoning, which was repurposed in 2009. De Blasio didn't read the bill, and I didn't read the bill. It was 114 pages, and it's what got us into trouble with this 2 doors, because it says that the developers have to build on site if they're going to do affordable housing, but it said if there's different kinds of housing on the same zone lot, then you can have 2 elevator shafts, and we thought that meant maybe commercial and then residential. We never pictured condos and rental and all these other issues. That's how we ended up with these 2 doors, which is terrible. So what you should pay attention to is in the next year, citywide, the City Planning Commission is going to be revising the inclusionary zoning law. So the question is, what would be the percentage on site? Where would the on site be? And how do you deal with the zoning lots, et cetera? We can't apparently just take that segmentation portion, which is so offensive, and just carve it out. We have to redo the whole thing. So that's something to pay attention to and be part of the discussion. But right now, I must admit, if I had a magic wand, and I've suggested this in writing to the city, I would look at, in Manhattan at least, all buildings in terms of what kind of affordable housing they should have when they're renovated. Right now, if you're building new or you're renovating, the only time as a neighborhood, elected official, community board, you have a say is if there is a zoning change or a special permit and so on. All of you know that. So all of these as of right is what I experienced as a city council member previously, community board member in the past. So I would like to see a larger percentage, even some of the as of rights have to come to the community in order to get input in terms of affordable housing, because we have a crisis. I know there's a big Ebola crisis. Guess what? We have a big affordable housing crisis also, and the same kind of attention should be paid to it. And the second thing is some of the tax subsidies, 421A and so on, which is also coming up in Albany next year. A lot of these programs were made at a time when we were not facing an affordable housing crisis. So the 80/20 is an outdated program. The 421A is an outdated program as it currently exists. So all of these ideas need to be reconstituted, in my opinion, in order to come up with the solutions that fit the Bronx and fit Manhattan. But we have gentrification. People are feeling very pushed out. The Harlem community I met with the other day, as I indicated, we're going to try to work on a step-by-step basis to try to address it, because entire buildings are being emptied despite the support of legal services and so on. So we have a real crisis on preservation and on building new.
Now, briefly, in like 60 seconds, because we're running out of time, you mentioned the poor door issue, but you also mentioned gentrification. I know some of my colleagues, like Josh Barrow at The Upshot, have pointed out that, unfortunately, if you do move all the affordable housing to the Bronx, then you get more bang for your buck. If, as Extel argues, with their poor door buildings, they're basically building 2 buildings smacked together with each other, because it's cheaper to build the poor building, even though it looks like it's part of the rich building. I mean, by taking out the poor door, giving people access to these units, mixing the units up with things, if it lowers their profits, maybe they argue they can get less affordable housing. I would argue there's not a pool shortage in the city, there's a housing crisis. And so if we can get 10 more units and have a poor door, don't you think that's worth it?
Well, I mean, I know Gary Barnett well, and we've discussed the same topic at Extel, and I respect the fact that he shows up at the community boards to have the same argument that you're having discussion now. But to me, this happens because we have so many condos. I don't know what the situation in the Bronx is, but I must admit, I don't think we expected so many condos. Originally, to the credit of Donald Trump, when he built affordable housing, it was mixed. you can't tell which apartment you're in. It's affordable or it's not, because it's all rental. And I would argue we need a lot more rental units and not as many condo units. And then you don't have a problem because everybody's mixed in the same building and you don't have this them and us. And I think the finances work out. So I think if you have a condo rental, we have to have a longer discussion and change some of these outdated laws that are on the books now. But I would argue that the city as a whole should be pushing rental market in some cases, middle income and low income.
We'll take some affordable home ownership as well in the Bronx.
Yeah.
On to the lightning round of sorts, sort of some specific borough questions for you. Again, if you can keep the answers here to about a minute. Of the boom in condos, particularly right south of the Central Park, I know it's an issue near and dear to the heart of Vin and the rest of the MAS folks. What kinds of regulations not only would you like to see, but are feasible, since a lot of these sites are now vested and Gary's going to build his 1,500-foot tower, the Park Lane is maybe going to be, we've got all these issues with shadows and things. What kind of regulations could address those problems?
Well, I mean, I have the loss of the Rizzoli bookstore. Talk about bookstores was a real crush for me, and we tried to save it, but we weren't able to. So I do think we've been talking with the city council members about trying to come up with legislation that would have a much more transparent process for the sale of air rights or zoning lot mergers. Right now, if you are a community board member or even borough president, you know at the last minute when the zoning lot mergers take place or when the air rights get sold. Gary Barnett was able to buy a lot and go up. And that, I think, whether it's Van Cortlandt Park or Central Park, I think that we have a right to a park having the right amount of sunshine. If you're a kid in a playground, all of a sudden when the sun hits 157, as that very tall building is known, you're not going to have any sun in that play lot. To me, that's an issue. That's a quality of life that we should be legislating against.
So one of the things that one of the authorities that we have under the New York City Charter is that we can introduce pieces of legislation through a city council member. And one of the legislation that I've introduced is to have a health impact study, as well as when you have environmental impact studies. In the Bronx, when you look at certain areas that have very high asthma rates and bronchitis and respiratory ailments, I think that as we do more building, we should be more cognizant of that. We should look to see, and I said this before, planning with purpose, what it would mean if having this increase in population, what is that going to mean for the local police precinct? What is it going to mean for the sanitation? What is it going to mean with regards to schools? I don't think that we're planning accordingly, holistically, when we're talking about residential development.
You mentioned asthma. The borough's been a real leader in sustainability for all, and I think you also mentioned it in your opening remarks. So can you tell us a little bit about what you guys have been doing under your borough presidency, and also what issues are left to tackle?
So we're very proud of our record. Before I became the borough president, I was in the New York State Assembly for almost 13 years. I was a member of the NCON committee, and it was there that I sort of made my bones with regards to not only fighting environmental injustice, but then turning it so that we can have a green economy. So what we've done in the Bronx is that we've looked at this from the lens of like what I call the green triangle. We've given developers the incentive to build green. That's why now, if you want to develop in my borough, if you want an address, if you want our Reso 8 money, or if you want my support during the ULURP process, we will not help unless you have some type of LEED or NYSERDA certification on your project. And we've been leading the city in that way. In fact, you should look up things like Arbor House and Villaverde and Bronx Chester. We have like the national paradigm of green build in the Bronx. My building in Borough Hall is the only municipal building in the city of New York with a green roof on it. And we've also, I think, we led the way when you talk about oil conversion. I put Reso 8 money in existing buildings so that they can convert from 6 to number 2 or natural gas at no cost. If we do this for the landlords at no cost to the tenants, and of course we've done thermal heating as well. So we financed this, and we're very proud of that record. And I think that as we move forward, this is something that we should also stipulate in whatever negotiations we have with developers as we continue to build residential housing in the city of New York.
Well, each borough president has a solid waste advisory board, and we do take it very seriously. We have 50 members. Brendan Sexton, the former head of sanitation department, is the head of it in Manhattan. And so working with them, we are looking at lots of different things. One of them is organics, because we need to have less garbage literally leaving our borough. And so what we have, I started when I was in the city council working with the schools in my district on the west side, where we got all of the organics, meaning the putrescibles from the kitchen, to be picked up separately and to go to a place that figures out a way that it goes back into the stream in a positive way, not into the someplace in West Virginia or Texas or wherever the landfills are. So we're very serious, and now there are 114 schools in Manhattan that are participating in this program, and I sat down with all the unions in the school to talk with the agencies to make sure it goes well, because not everybody has type A moms sitting in the kitchen pulling the wrong thing out of the wrong bin like we do on the west side. So we're all the other schools are working with the unions successfully. Number two, I'm a big believer in fresh food. I love the green market, and I want all of our agencies. We buy in the city of New York, second only to the Department of Defense, because we have the schools and we have the hospitals, we have the jails and so on. So I took all of the city agencies on a farm tour upstate. It was hysterical. But the good news is that Department of DCAS, which is our general services, citywide administrative services, based on a law that I passed in the city council, is going to have to start purchasing from the farmers in the state of New York. And that'll make a big difference. And so we're working on that. Thank you.
Well, you'll have to have us all to 1 Center Street sometime for lunch so we can enjoy the food. It's often said that mayors are the real leaders, but I think if you're here in New York, not that the mayor isn't doing a great job, but really it's the borough presidents we have to thank who are on the ground, leading the
best job in the world. If you would allow me, I know we've run out of time, but I want to invite everyone here. On Sunday, we have something called Tour de Bronx, and it's the largest free cycling event in the state of New York. We've had over 6,000 cyclists last year. It's a great way for you to come, and if you haven't been to my borough in quite some time, come and rediscover the Bronx.
And we've got a city bike thing here, so you could tour some of Manhattan on the way up.
Don't forget about Manhattan. Don't forget about Manhattan.
Those tours are after the panel. Just walk outside. All right, thanks
you.
everyone.
Thank you.